Hi, everybody. I'm Zilla Blitz, and welcome. I'm extremely excited tonight to have Grant from Pushing Cardboard on the channel to talk about a recent adventure we had at San Diego HistCon, where we both played the game Task Force. So in this video, we're going to be talking about that. But I do want to mention, too, that Grant has the fabulous podcast and YouTube channel, Pushing Cardboard. And if you haven't listened to it, I should also mention that, Grant, your biggest fan that I know of is actually our dog, because when our dog has separation anxiety, and when we go out, I always say, hey, Google, play Pushing Cardboard. So our dog has probably heard you about 30 or 40 hours. So thanks for joining.
I'm glad to be here, and I hope to meet your dog someday. I imagine it will recognize my voice.
I think he will. I know he's heard your voice for at least 50 or 60 hours now. So, but shall we jump in and chat about Task Force?
Yeah, I mean, we played this game in San Diego, and neither of us had played it opposed before, so it was both of our first time to play it opposed. I had a terrific time. I thought it was super fun.
Yeah, I read the rules. I had started the rules a while ago, and I'd done kind of like a first look video on it, and then I read the rules on the plane on the way to San Diego. But I know you had played some of the learning scenarios before that. We played the Midway scenario, just to clarify too, which is I think like the first or second full carrier scenario. Some of the earlier scenarios are kind of learning scenarios that they kind of limit the mechanics and stuff, right?
Yeah, this was the first or second one that has capital ships and carriers and the whole 9 yards. I think it's the second one that has everything, and it did have kind of everything.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things you mentioned too, the biggest thought I had, it was a blast. I mean, it was really fun that game that we played. I had a great time.
Yeah, I think what made it so fun is it gave that thing that you always want from a World War II naval game, which is the cat and mouse of trying to find the other guy. Like that's like if you don't have that, then you don't really have a game. But
right.
the search and then launch thing worked really well, and we were both super tense every time we had a search check go against us.
Yeah, and I think the way when it started out, because the Japanese have 4 carriers in the Battle of Midway, 2 larger ones and 2 kind of medium-sized ones, and the U.S. has Hornet, Yorktown, and the Enterprise, 3 big, powerful carriers.
Yeah,
and I think you hit my Akagi and sank it, and then irreparably damaged the Kaga, so I couldn't launch. So I had to sit, and that was the morning of the first day, right? So I came in, I was heading towards Midway. I launched and I hit Midway with that air raid that you have to conduct as the Japanese player. And then you had found out exactly where my carriers were. And you sent, I think you had 2 carriers in range, right? You had the Yorktown and the Hornet in range. And the Enterprise was off doing its own thing on the other side of Midway, right? It was out of range, I think, which kind of that actually saved me. Because I think if you had hit me with all 3 carriers, you probably would have taken down another one of my carriers, and I would have been dead in the water.
Yeah, as it was, it didn't turn out that way.
Right, because you think, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
no, it's you. I sank one and crippled one of yours, and then I'm feeling really good. And then I think you sunk the Hornet and crippled the Yorktown, or vice versa. It was like, oh, okay, turnabout's fair play here.
Right. I think actually there was we did that. There was the one little goofy thing where we actually caught the second carrier in surface combat and hit it and damaged and was able to follow up with the strike and take it down.
That's right.
And then, yeah. And then all good military battles. The 2 commanders were really hungry because we had skipped lunch. And so we decided to call an armistice and head off to dinner, leaving the mystery of what would have happened, because it's a 2-day scenario. And we played the first day, and we essentially had each knocked out 2 carriers of the other side. You had a fully loaded Enterprise left, and I had a depleted Hiryu and Soryu, the other 2 medium carriers. So I think you had probably at least as many planes. And overnight, we would have lost contact with each other because you throw out all the dummy task force.
Yeah, we'd have to do the whole search thing again. But like the Enterprise is definitely the most fearsome ship left, but those 0 fighters with there's that rule that lets you split the zeros into two half squadrons, and like that lets you cover more territory, so you can cover. You can search or not search more, but you can have more in cap, more in your strikes. It's
yes,
unless you it's really frustrating to see those counters split in two.
Right. So I felt like I had a good. I mean, the cap, I had to still recycle it below decks, but getting the cap up was easier because I could divide those up and chop up planes as they came in pretty easily too. So
yeah, two counters equals 4, just like that.
Yeah. And the other thing I liked about the game too, that the mechanic for loaded and armed and fueled planes on the deck, because if your carriers get hit when that's the situation, and I think that happened a couple times in our game. I think you, like the one that you sank, it almost sank like 7 times because you blew up literally everything that was on.
Yeah, everything was ready on the deck, and so there was all this consecutive damage or whatever the rule is. But it was like those planes just started going up.
Yeah, I think it was roll a die, and it was a 50% chance they blew up. And if they blew up, that carrier was essentially gone, which is historically what happened, because the U.S. planes caught the Japanese planes all on the decks with armed and fueled, and just absolutely, wreaked havoc on the Japanese carriers there.
And that's another big part of the game. If for anybody who hasn't played it, you have to decide how many of your fighters and your bombers you're going to have ready to launch. Then you can either put a few fighters in cap, but you have to decide how many you're going to take on any kind of a strike mission you go. But when they're done the mission, then they come back and they have to go into reserve and then to ready. So there's this cycle where you can catch the other guy with his planes all in reserve as well, where he's like, you found him and he can't launch back.
Right. Yeah. And I know there was one time too where I wanted to launch, but I always had them all in reserve. I didn't want to put them on ready because I knew you were going to hit me, and it was like, okay, and you still caught me on one, because I think it was your first strike was the fighters to kind of check out where I was, and then your second strike went for money and just caught me fully loaded on decks with planes and stuff. So, but I think that whole that's I think one of the things that really that I felt like they executed well in the game was that whole, like you kind of mentioned, that sense of naval combat. But what about your thoughts on the hunt and search, the search and find metric, and the fog of war and the element there?
Yeah, that's kind of the key thing in a carrier battle game, right? Is like, because once you're found, if you can find the other guy before he finds you, then you can strike before he can strike, and it can be game over. So in this game, you put all your ships in task forces, and each task force has a counter, but you also get a whack of dummy counters, right? And then when you have to find the other guy, you have to launch searches from your planes, and there's a cup full of a chit pull mechanism where the person who's being searched pulls a chit, and it'll say if he has to say that it's been detected or not found, or there's a third possibility where it's been detected but misidentified, and that can happen as well. So there, like, it's not an automatic thing. You know where that chit is that counter is on the board, but you still have to go through this whole search procedure to find out if it's a dummy, or if it's a carrier fleet, or if it's a capital ship fleet.
Right. And we both I thought it was funny, we both did the exact same deception mechanic, which was to take 2 destroyers. So we made a surface fleet, but yours absolutely fooled mine, right? So because I thought for sure the way the search detection went that, okay, this was actually a carrier fleet. I launched everything there, and there were 2 destroyers.
Yeah, those destroyers went down quick, but they did their job.
They did their job. The end of those destroyers. Yeah, there was just planes everywhere.
I've been playing another game called from Against the Odds magazine called Clash of Carriers, and they have a similar thing where there's dummy task forces out there. You don't know which counters are real or not, but rather than a chit pull, they just the person who's being searched rolls on a table secretly. And again, it says you have to say if there's no detection, or there's like a kind of a precise detection, but there's a few steps in between where you have to tell them, but you can raise or lower the number of ships by 2 or 4 or whatever you can.
Right,
but it's a similar sort of thing where it's like you're searching hexes, to try and identify where the real task forces are before you launch your planes.
And I know when you set it up too, no, you put the game boxes. So you have the task force boards where you have all your ships and things, and we put the game boxes in between those so that we couldn't see each other's. And I felt like that was really helpful too.
Yeah,
that enhanced the gameplay.
The rules suggest that, but it's not. It's like it's one of those optional rules. But I think it really added some spice because, like you said, we both had that little mini destroyer force that tricked the other guy. So that would have been more obvious if we could have seen each other's displays, I think.
Yes, yeah, and also knowing like what planes were ready and what condition they were in and what was moving around and what were you trying to do. I felt like if I had been able to see what your carriers were doing, I would have had a better idea where they were and what they were, and that two of them were there and one of them wasn't. So I really liked having the box up in front. I did like the hidden mechanic within the game too, because I feel like when you have that big double blind system, sometimes it can get easy for mistakes to happen, if that makes sense. Like I was thinking on
also, like I'm lucky enough to have one opponent, let alone have a third person who's going to umpire some kind of a double blind situation.
Right. Yeah, like I really like the Chase of the Bismarck, but that has, you've got two big full screens, so you have no idea what's going on, and some of those mechanics are a little bit complex, so you kind of both need to make sure you understand the rules really well. There's also an element of trust goes without saying. You've got to trust that the other person's telling you the truth and all that stuff, and not trying to.
I reckon like anybody, I trust everybody I play with. That's just,
I do. I'm not really. Yeah, I'm the kind of
scratch them off later if they do something funky, but that's
right.
Yeah.
No, I'm in the same way. I was actually just reading a book about gameplay, and the guy was talking about how you play to win, but you don't really care if you win. So, and that's kind of the way I am. It's like I'm trying to win, but it's like
exactly how I feel like it's my duty to try to win, to give the other person a good game. But it really doesn't. Like whether I win or lose, sometimes I don't even remember. Like it's just
right. Not exactly.
It's the bigger thing is the story we make, and
exactly. And I felt like that was
historical games, right? It's like the narrative we spin out of them.
And that's the thing that I felt like Task Force did really well was, we had a story at the end. It really spun a really good narrative. The gameplay, I had high expectations for the gameplay, and it met them. Even I think exceeded them. I was curious about how the whole hunt and search mechanic would work, but I felt like that was very manageable. What about the game complexity too?
Well, it's a big box and it feels like there's a ton of stuff in there, and it feels like, oh my God, it's going to be a heavy game, but I don't think it's all that complex at all. And like I'd only rate it maybe a 5 out of 10. I think this is a way lighter game than Mark Herman's Pacific War or something like that. This is like half the complexity of that. Plus, it gives you those learning scenarios that kind of step you up, so that by the time you're at scenario 4 and 5 and you're getting your first carriers, you're like, oh well, I already know how movement works. I know how the air attacks work. Like you've got yourself in a spot to play in a kind of, I guess it's kind of programmed instruction when they set it.
Yeah. And I skipped the whole thing, right? Because I just read the rules on the plane, jumped in, but I had in my impression that it was a complex game. It was going to take a long time to learn. Sometimes I think you can look at a game that has programmed instruction and you assume, oh, I kind of need to work through all these steps to learn how to play, so it must be very complex.
Yeah.
But it was really easy just to jump into the Midway scenario. I think some of the mechanics are kind of novel too, with the search mechanics aren't something that you see, I think, in a lot of different games done exactly that way. The carrier rotation, the ship battles, there's some unique rules there, but
the way hits happen is I haven't seen that done, where it's like, if a ship can take, say, 7 hit points, if I do 6 hits against it, nothing really happens. If I do 7 hits, it gets this light damage marker, but if I do more than the 7, then it flips onto its damage side, and we go through the whole thing again to eventually sink it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like it's almost like it gives it 4 steps in a way. It's not exactly that, but it is. I wasn't sure how that was going to work, and it turned out that it worked great.
Yeah, and there's kind of you're trying to get to that threshold damage, and you know you need that threshold damage, otherwise it just didn't enough to impact the functionality of the ship. Which, yeah, I felt like all that worked really, really well.
It also had a.
Yeah.
Also thought the way that the ship anti-aircraft worked when you're bringing in your strike, and the ship anti-aircraft doesn't knock out your planes, but the better your anti-aircraft manages to do, it gives a bigger and bigger dice roll modifier to the attacking planes, and a higher number is worse. They want a lower number. So if your AA works really well, I still attack with my full force, but I get this +8 or something, and it's like
Yeah, you could see like scattering of the planes as they're coming in. It was so effective. I think there was an element of damage and die roll modifier, and it could vary depending upon how you rolled. But that whole like the working through cap and the anti-aircraft and then strikes, that felt really organic and authentic to me in terms of how the game modeled it.
Yeah. And that's exactly how the Clash of Carriers games that I'm playing does it as well. It's like, I guess it makes sense. You do the cap, you see who gets through, then you got to go against the AA and see who gets through. And if there's anybody less, you do the strike. And that's pretty much how it really happened, I suppose.
Yeah. This one was actually, just as an aside, it was really fun for me to play because the first game I ever played, my first war game was Midway, Avalon Hills, Midway.
Great.
And I played that until it fell apart. So I played probably 50, 60 games of that.
And how does that compare to this?
Yeah, it's a simpler game. And it's completely double blind. So you've got boards up, and basically it's almost like a battleship type of thing where you're calling out kind of grids where the enemy ships, and then you're sending your strikes there. But very much it's that same kind of thing. It's who hits first and who hits hardest is going to win. If I remember right, you didn't have a lot of room for like second and third strikes. Like a lot of planes would get shot down, so you almost had like one. But it's so long, I kind of probably misremembering it. But to me, it always played out like whoever hit first won.
Right. Yeah.
And that was
which is real in its own way as well. But it's fun to have a little bit more nuanced approach to that.
Right. But to be fair, like the Battle of Midway was almost like exactly like different degrees, but the U.S. hit the Japanese fleets with some incredible damage. Like it left one carrier functional, and that carrier came back, and I think it crippled the Yorktown, I want to say, at Midway. So there was that, we had the same ebb and flow, just of different degrees going. And had you hit a third carrier, I might have not been able to take out another one. And had you hit one carrier, I might have taken out two. I thought it did a really good job of kind of modeling the history of how it went too. It
felt like the real, like it felt like we were simulating something.
Yes. Yeah, like exactly. Yeah. Speaking of that, I did have a question. I saw some conversation because one of the things that the game does, that you can only have one carrier in a fleet, which I think is historical. Yeah, in a task force. Yeah.
So that's really, especially like the Japanese used to put two carriers, like they would pair their carriers, I think. And same with the U.S. But when I first got the game, that was the first thing that struck me was like, well, why can't I put 3 carriers in a task force and crown, with a bunch of capital ships in support? But then you can sort of do that in that if I make task force A has the Yorktown and task force B has the Hornet, I can put them in the same hex.
Yeah.
And basically have the same thing.
Right, because I think I'd read some stuff. I forget where I read it, but someone said, that didn't feel authentic. But to me, it didn't feel like it impacted the quality of play at all. It felt fine. No. Like I could do what I wanted to. I could keep them together. I could move them apart. And so, I felt like it worked out really, really well. What about the, can we talk a little bit about Solitaire in the game? So the Solitaire rating on the back of the box is a 7.
That's I don't I love Vuca. I'm a big supporter. I love every game I've played of theirs, but I'm going to quibble with that rating. I can't see a 7 out of 10 being a real rating for Solitaire for this game, given the hidden movement. Like if you just want to play capital ship on capital ship, sure, it's great for Solitaire, but for carriers.
And I agree too. And it's a little deceptive. Not deceptive. I don't know if deceptive sounds like there's some lack of intent. There's something. There are Solitaire scenarios, but they're the ones that have the limited mechanics. Like the Pearl Harbor scenario, where basically you're learning dive bombing and torpedo bombing mechanics with your planes against stationary targets. So it is a Solitaire scenario, but to me, the glow and the shine of the game comes when you get the carriers in.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where you really need that hidden mechanic, and that's not going to work really well. So
yeah, I played one or two scenarios with the full carrier experience solo, and the best I could do was like I would put out all the task forces for the enemy, and then when I searched one, if it was like real contact and I had to reveal it, then I'd roll to see if something was there or not. So I was just myself, but I made my own Solitaire system. It's not like this game, like the cat and mouse between the hiding and the finding. Yeah. That's the heart of the game.
Yeah. How about replayability?
I think it's huge. I think this game could be played over and over. Like I think we could sit down tonight and play the Midway scenario again, and it would be completely different than last time because we'd both try new things, and the way we found each other or didn't is going to be completely different from the first time we played.
Yeah, and the way you organize. And I think even Midway to me felt like a little bit of I don't want to say a learning scenario, but a little bit of, because the Japanese have some very particular constraints to moving towards Midway that, I mean, you knew where I was, right? So it was hard for me to disguise where things were. All your searches were effective. I suppose that could have been different. But I think as you get into those later scenarios with fleets, with task forces in different directions, that whole cat and mouse and ambiguity is going to really kind of escalate and make it really, really interesting to see where things are.
And I think they rate the Midway scenario as a beginner or an intermediate scenario, or like it is like it's an early scenario in terms of the task or the carrier battles. They just get more involved after that as you go along.
And there's a lot. I don't remember the exact number, but there's a lot of scenarios.
Like I think there's like a dozen or something. There's a lot, and I mean they all have their own mounted maps. It's like Vuca just goes the whole 9 yards in terms of components.
I have it here. I was so glad that you were driving because I was thinking I'm going to take this in my luggage. It weighs a ton.
Yeah, you would have had to pay. Would have had to pay extra an extra luggage fee on the airline because that thing feels like it weighs 10 pounds on its own.
Yeah, and the production qualities.
All the ships have their own counters other than the destroyers. So even battleships that were sunk at Pearl Harbor and only turn up in that introductory scenario.
Right.
They've got their own counter, right? It's like just and those are pre-rounded. They're just punch counters. There's no counter clipping. It's it's typical Vuca, like deluxe components all the way.
Setting the bar for us. They're setting. But I'm surprised. I think so. I guess kind of like sliding over into some final thoughts on this. I am really high on the gameplay for this one. I thought it was really, really good. I think I would recommend to this anyone who's got a good partner they can play 2-player games with and likes World War II, like especially Pacific naval combat. I think this is a real winner that people are going to. I probably wouldn't recommend it just as you. I probably wouldn't recommend it for the Solitaire experience. I think you're kind of playing with crutches, and it's like I don't think it would shine for me in that role, but I absolutely loved the way that we played it. And I felt like it spun great narrative. The decisions were good. Learning how your opponent's thinking. There's that whole, what are you thinking? What are you trying to do here?
Well, and when you were reading the rulebook, you thought, maybe this is a bit complicated, whatever. And then you play it and you go, well, it's like 3 tables that you roll on when you've got the intercepting cap. You've got the AA, and then you've got the strike, and those each of those tables, they're not filled with dice roll modifiers or anything. There's not a lot of it's just a lot of straight rolling. Other than your AA is going to give you a DRM for the strike, but other than that, there's 1 or 2 DRMs on each table, so it's really, really straightforward.
And I don't know if it was the way the rule book was organized that made it hard for me to wrap my head around it a little bit. Because as I know I went through the rule book a while ago, and as I was going through it, I felt like I wasn't quite getting it. Like I said, oh wow, this is kind of complicated. And I'm not sure if it was just the way it was carrying information around, but once we started playing, it was crystal clear. And I said, oh, this is so much easier than I thought it was going to be.
It's one of those cases where you read it in the rules and you're kind of grokking it, but once you look at the chart, it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the explanation is more confusing than the actual numbers and the columns. It's like, oh, yeah. Well, obviously what happens. I see what happens here.
Yeah, because I think even though it was our first game to play opposed, and I hadn't played even one of the learning scenarios, I felt like for the most part we were mistake-free. I think we had missed like one little rule about how if a carrier gets significant damage from minor damage, you have to roll twice on the potential disabling roll.
Right.
We just missed the first. And it didn't.
Might have given us another hit or two or something. Yeah.
And maybe I think you might have missed the recycling of cap planes on the.
I might have been able to recycle a cap one move quicker.
Yes.
Than I actually did once or twice.
Because the cap works differently. The recycling, the U.S. cap recycling is more effective than the Japanese.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but that was really the only place.
Funny stuff. It's like it's not like it's a beer and pretzels game, but it's only just above that. It just looks so beautiful, but it's totally approachable.
Yeah, exactly. Totally approachable, totally playable, totally accessible. And if all of the other scenarios are like the ones that we had, I think I think more people should get this. More people should learn about it. More people will really enjoy playing it. It was it's certainly one of the great experiences we had in San Diego, but it was really fun playing.
Well, I think the proof was in the pudding. The fact that we so closely recreated Midway on the first day, it was just like, holy smokes, this is how it works.
Right. Yeah, and there was that little there's that strategy guide at the back. I think we talked about it a little before we started, where as the Japanese player, it's like you're going to get hit, but you're probably going to have something left to hit back with. Right. Don't miss. And then when I hit your destroyers, I was like, oh, I was toast. But I think the Soryu on that second attack that you had just survived, because it had planes on the deck ready to go before nightfall, because you got to get them up in the air before night. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to retrieve them and you can't launch. And I had to roll that 50% chance they would have all blown up, and they didn't, which meant that the Soryu was still functional. So I could get enough planes up in the air to hit the Hornet, I think it was, or the other one, the Yorktown, and put that one away. And so it was like, it was so close. It could have gone either way on that battle. Yeah. So, and my destroyer fleet didn't fool yours at all. You just that's the destroyers. It's not, you kind of completely trashed my carriers.
Well, I think it was just lucky. I was probably giving you my game face there.
You certainly didn't send your entire strike force from all your carriers to sink 2 destroyers.
I was giving you my best Spruance look or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground on this one. Is there anything else that comes to mind that you think people would like to hear about the game or know about the game?
I think we kind of covered it all. It's there's other older Pacific War games out there that I haven't played that I'm Flat Top and things like that. I just got a used copy of that, I think, from our good friends at Noble Knight. I haven't played it yet. And I also have the aforementioned Mark Herman's giant Pacific War. But I mean, every time I look at that, it just I don't know. I go, it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot. I don't know. It's going to take
a lot. Yeah.
So
I've heard people talk about 2-player experiences with that one though. Like weekend experiences playing one of the operations and having a lot of fun with it too.
I think it's going to be a great game once I finally play it. But this one was just like, you'd read the rule book. I played it a bit. I felt like we set up and were playing in under half an hour. It was like,
and it took us. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'd say about 2 hours.
Yeah, to play the first day. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and that was we were learning it too. So I felt like we could have cut that time in half.
Once we were fluent with the charts and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if we had started the scenario from scratch now, after having playing that learning, we could probably play the whole thing in maybe 2.5 hours or so.
Yeah, 3 at the most, I think, for sure.
Yeah.
It's quick to get to the table and play it. There's no it's quick to teach. It felt like it wasn't exactly like I was teaching you, but I was sort of like reinforcing what you'd read. So it was like, we're going to do this and this and this, and then we were playing.
Yeah, and you had it all set up. It was very accessible. That again, that was the thing that I, for whatever reason, I'm not sure, I had it in my head it was going to be harder to learn, harder to play, more fiddly, but it was none of those things. It was like, wow, this is fast and streamlined.
Yeah. It's got a great, just a great straightforward sequence of play that you just chunk through, and it's like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it helps because the guy, I mean, you understand, people understand what naval combat was like. You and the game recreates it. So as you get into it, it's like, oh, okay, it fits with kind of your idea of what should be going on. The systems work in that regard, so that makes it even easier to play.
You're like, you're having those decisions about like how many of my fighters am I gonna put up in cap, and how many I'm gonna keep on deck, and hope that this search works, because you got a cap decision before you know the results of your searches and all that. And so I think you're having some of the same kind of heart palpitations that the admirals had. Well, thank you again for playing. It was one of the highlights of San Diego for me, was to get a chance to play that game with you. In addition to our breakfasts too, those were great as well. I'm giving the breakfast equal billing, but I love the breakfast, so that means I love this.
Yeah. But thanks too for joining tonight and for having this. I thought we would go for about 15 minutes about it, but I think we went quite a bit longer. So it's probably everything you want to know about Task Force. But I really had a blast playing, and it was just it was really a fun game.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm always watching your channel, and now that I know your dog is listening to my channel or my podcast, it's like I feel like we have this symbiotic thing going that I'm really happy about.
Yes, likewise. So we'll have to do more. Thank you everybody for watching, and have a great night.
Good night.